Well, meanwhile, two Albuquerque police officers have now been charged with murder after shooting a homeless camper to death. Officers Dominic Bettis and Keith Sandy shot and killed camper James Boyd after a standoff that lasted several hours. The shooting provoked national criticism of APB after this video was released. The video showing the officers firing what appears to be tear gas or a smoke grenade at Boyd, and then a canine charging him. At this point, Boyd reaches into his pockets and he pulls out two small knives, appearing to surrender, but then is shot multiple times. We're freezing the video here, not showing Boyd's death, but it is at this moment that he is then killed. Also at the center of this case, audio from the officer's dash cam in which Officer Keith Sandy is angered that Boyd is asking to deal with state police instead of Albuquerque police and says, quote, "For this effing lunatic, I'm going to shoot him in the penis with a shotgun here in a second." Well, early on, Albuquerque police denied that Sandy said the word penis and instead claimed that he had actually said, quote, "I'm going to shoot him with a taser shotgun in a second." However, the APD's denial conflicted with Sandy's acknowledgement to investigators that he did in fact say, "shoot him in the penis," but he said it as a joke, he says, just kind of locker room banter. He told investigators, quote, "I just told him, don't worry, I'll shoot him in the pecker with this and call it good," end quote. Earlier, I was joined by Micah McCoy, Communications Director for New Mexico's American Civil Liberties Union. I first asked him what the response to this case has been like in Albuquerque.
The shooting of James Boyd, who is a homeless camper who was camping illegally in the foothills of the Sandia Mountains right next to Albuquerque, New Mexico, it really shocked the consciences of not only our city, but the country. What we saw on the officer-worn video, one of the officers was wearing a camera on his helmet, was essentially two officers gunning a man down who posed little to no threat to him, to themselves, in what appeared to be cold blood. And it was just so shocking that it really was a wake-up call for this community and the nation at large. We had protests in the streets here in Albuquerque for multiple days. Soon after this incident, the Department of Justice released a scathing report finding that the Albuquerque Police Department has a pattern and practice of violating civil rights and using excessive force. So now we're in a place where we're trying to rebuild this broken police department and find a way where we can police our community constitutionally without excessive force like we saw in the foothills. Yeah, certainly the Albuquerque PD, as you mentioned here, has really been plagued with problems over the past few years. Aside from this case, and we have multiple other cases, including one particular officer who's gotten in trouble multiple times when he has shot suspects, and even wearing body cameras, that hasn't seemed to help. Well, I think we have to recognize that the body cameras are an essential part of the solution. We know from field tests in places like Rialto, California, that body-worn cameras, officer-worn cameras, drastically reduce the amount of citizen complaints against officers. And it goes both ways, too. It protects officers from unfounded accusations, and it protects the citizenry against officers abusing their powers. So it's a win-win situation for them all. The problem is that unless there is a consistent enforced policy governing the use of these cameras, they're not going to be effective. If officers forget to turn them on or decide not to turn them on or don't turn in the footage or claim that a camera has malfunctioned, and there's no consequences to failing to record in these situations that they're supposed to record, then having the cameras isn't going to do a whole lot of good. So you've got to have the cameras and a consistently enforced policy behind those cameras. I want to go back just for a minute to the Boyd case specifically. In this case, the attorney who's representing Officer Keith Sandy came out today saying that essentially this was a huge mistake to indict Officer Sandy as well as the other officer in this case, saying that the two of them did nothing criminal here. They said that it was tragic but not criminal, and then claims that the officer was trying to defend the life of the canine that was charging at Mr. Boyd. What say you to that? Well, I mean, I think the bottom line here is that the district attorney's office decided, and I think not lightly, that they have enough evidence to bring criminal charges against these two officers. And I think we've got to recognize how rare that is. This does not happen very often. Anybody who's been following these kind of issues for any amount of time knows that it almost never are criminal charges brought against officers in these types of situations. So I think we've got to recognize that there's at least some evidence there that the district attorney believes is adequate to bring these charges. And I mean, if you just look at the video, if you watch the video of that day, it is hard to look at that video. It's hard to watch to begin with, but it's hard to watch that video and walk away from that just as a lay person, as an average citizen, and say that James Boyd was not murdered that day.
Well, and it's also, as you point out, how rare this is for charges to be brought. It's also rare, and in this case, the city of Albuquerque is not going to be paying for the legal fees and for the representation of these two officers. They're on their own in this case, which is also a rarity. Micah McCoy of the ACLU of New Mexico, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.